I've always believed that everyone has a story and that everyone's story has value. I'm Joanna Pena Bickley, the host of Designed By, a new Designed By Us documentary series that recognizes the changemakers, imagineers, and inventors in STEAMed science, technology, engineering, arts, math, and design. As I have traveled the globe and collaborated with some of the world's leading scientists, artists, and mathematicians, I know that daring to design the future today all begins with a vision and a narrative of a hopeful future. I invite you to join us on a journey of discovery, finding the voices and magic makers, changing the very shape of our future. And so today, on today's podcast, I couldn't be more excited to introduce us to Kat Gordon. This is a woman who has inspired incredible change in multiple industries, not just the advertising industry, but also someone who I call friend and advisor. And I know someone that has built a movement through staying true to the grassroots and fundamentals of the purpose that you were put on this planet to do, which is a very powerful proposition. So Kat, welcome to Designed By.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I've always been on the other side of this conversation with you, so I am so looking forward to reversing roles for a second. You know, you're a remarkable creator and writer. Where did all of this start?
I was born in Stuyvesant Town in New York City and grew up in Westchester County, right outside New York City. Um, Went to college in Pennsylvania, was a French major, studied in Paris my junior year, settled back into New York City after college. So, an East Coaster. I've been living in Palo Alto, California for the last, gosh, I'm losing track of time. I would guess 25 years. So I kind of don't really have that identity anymore of belonging to one coast or the other, which is nice.
That's fantastic. So you grew up on the East Coast. Talk to me a little bit about like what were you like as a kid? Like,
Yeah, it's funny. The word awe um, came up for me at the New Year's when you think about like what do you want to feel more of this year, and I have a couple memories of very early childhood of delight, of like things that I didn't know existed and discovering them. And one example is I remember going to a neighbor's house and they were making gingerbread houses at the holidays. And for me, there was something so outrageous about that you were like decorating something with candy and then you were going to eat it. And it was like just the deliciousness of that. I remember having a similar feeling the first time I saw a magic show, like the idea that you could have a craft that was just about surprising people or kind of that the entertainment aspect of that. So I think as a kid, I always enjoyed things that were outside the monotony of life, that were kind of like a little extra, a little special. Definitely was always interested in reading. I was the kid that won the, summer book challenge at the local library. I kept a journal. I had pen pals, which is not something that today's youth would probably even relate to, but literally would have pen pals through that old TV show, The Big Blue Marble. You'd ask for a pen pal, and I had pen pals from all over the world, and I would write them letters and receive their letters. So just always had a curiosity about other people, other lands, other traditions. Probably not a surprise that I became a French major and always had a good facility for languages. So yeah, I think I was very shy as a kid, and I liked the worlds that books opened up for me. It was safe. You didn't have to put yourself out there. I was a gymnast. I was a very physical kid too. So yeah, just kind of a curious little kid.
in that curiosity, you ink through that curiosity and, go through high school and when you were making that college decision, hey, I'm going to go and study French. What can you do with French, right? You start asking yourself your questions. What might I study? How did you stumble into French?
Um, I actually added French as my second major. So my first major was English, and so it's a double major. It just, I don't think I was nearly as calculated as today's kids are. I have two kids in college now, and I just followed what was interesting to me. And I remember when I started learning French in seventh grade, I liked again, that feeling of like being able to speak a language and almost like a secret code that you could talk in front of people and they wouldn't know what you're saying. I thought it was an exceptionally beautiful language. I still do. And so I just got to college and really liked my French professors in college and was good at, was a very good, strong student. I became the president of the French club on campus, and we would have these crepe breakfasts and stuff. And it just was, I was always someone who followed the yumminess of something. Like if it tickled me in some way and I liked it or I felt good at it, I didn't question the monetization of it. It was just, I want to be here. I want to be doing this.
So you talked about awe, and I think there's something there. You talked, about awe and magic, and so much of what we do strives to be indistinguishable to be from that space. I know I certainly have that challenge in my head is, how do you make something magical for people? And, whether it was being influenced by, David Copperfield or David Blaine or any of the hundreds of magicians out there who uh, take a turn of, sometimes illusion or illusion as opposed to deception. And it's important,
Hmm.
important distinction,
Yeah.
or mind manipulation. Those are all, again, the dark crafts of magic, right? But then you look at the craft of reading a remarkable book that's able to whisk you away into a story, or I think that in our, past and more recent past, it was the ability for us to try to tell a remarkable story that people could identify with and somehow sell a product in the middle of all of that.
Yeah.
So you go to school for that, you go to French, you're really an explorer, right? An explorer of language, which is so rich for a writer. Um, you come out of school and you go, how am I going to apply this? How did you make the decision to, what was that first job? What did you go looking for?
Again, so different than today's graduates. I took the job that was offered to me as, in the fastest way. And so that was at USA Today newspaper in the ad sales department on Madison Avenue. I didn't yet know what advertising copywriting was. I soon learned by being inside the machine of an ad sales department and being intrigued by the creative department and realizing there was a job where you were a commercial writer and you got paid well. And so just kept following the next breadcrumb of what intrigued me. And so my first job that I got as a copywriter, I think I was 23 or 24 years old. So young, I found it fast and I threw myself all in, took night classes at School of Visual Arts and copywriting. And this is an interesting thing. I remember when I first started going to copywriting classes, I remember the teachers were two executive creative directors. They were both men. I can't remember even their names or even which agencies they worked at. But, as a student, you kind of look at them as celebrities. These are the men that have made it. They're teaching this class. They would bring in campaigns they had been making inside their agencies. And I knew that I was getting the hang of it when I started rewriting their headlines in my mind. Like they started showing campaigns they had done, and I thought I would have done that differently, or I had a point of view. It wasn't just I was learning a craft, I was learning, an instinct and what I found intriguing. And so I think I very quickly realized I had a knack for this and that I liked it. And that was it. I never, over the years, I worked in every conceivable permutation of creative company. I've worked at in house, I've worked on the client side, I've owned my own agency, I've been a freelancer, I've worked at big agencies, which is awesome because you realize how to be an agile creative and how to apply. I think living in Silicon Valley when I moved to California and had to kind of repackage myself, um, all of a sudden I had to learn tech, which I was the person who, would call IT on speed dial and be like, my computer's blinking, not particularly comfortable around tech. And then I learned it. And the very first assignment I worked on was a Microsoft developer tool. I mean, talk about being thrown in the deep end of the pool. But you realize, oh, everything in life is analogous to something else in life: client, server, waitress, customer. It's just, I was able to figure out a way to understand technology on my own terms. And in a way, that was the secret weapon, because most people reading ads or evaluating, you know, tech solutions, they're not IT professionals. They're people like, you or me trying to figure out what they need. And so to be able to talk to them and make something accessible, I became kind of known as the writer that was very, very good at that, at asking the questions of the product managers and figuring out just enough to talk about what this product is and what it represents and why you should want it. So yeah, I'm really, when I look back on my career, it's so it's been so much me following my interest, and I'm really trying to ingrain that in my sons. That I have a son who's graduating from college right now, and I said to him, pay attention to what you do where you lose track of time, because that's what you should be doing all the time with your career. You want to do the thing that just obsesses you. And for me, that was always ideas, language, visuals. I love the camaraderie of the team sport of creativity, that you're with working with others. I love having other people start to realize an idea and you almost are like a midwife for it. You say, oh, and what about this? And then you add on to it, and it's, the collaboration is really exciting. So that's kind of my story professionally.
I love that you're taking that and really trying to embed it in your children, because I think so much today as parents we get into a space of they got to get into the right college, they've got to do this, and it's the they gottas. In reality, they got to do nothing.
That's right. That's right.
They got
And
to be
oh,
happy.
it's so true. And I think living in Palo Alto, where I live, very easy to fall prey to that line of thinking. And I'm lucky too that my husband and I are kind of aligned in just knowing that there's more to life than your resume, and wanting the boys to try everything and meet everyone and go everywhere, and contribute in some way. Like, to me, there's a real selflessness when you're in your zone of what you can do with that gift. I mean, some of the best work I've done has been pro bono campaigns for, charities. And that's awesome to be able to use a skill you have to persuade other people to care about a cause or get out their checkbook and, make a donation. And so I want my kids to have that same sense of service, I guess it comes down to.
Fantastic. So if you think back to that, that you've come of age, you're a copywriter now, right? And it really isn't copywriter, you're a writer.
Yep.
At your core, you're a writer. If you think back, what are some of the creations that you're most proud of?
Um, I think probably the thing I'm most proud of is the writing and the thinking and the speaking that I did to start to raise awareness of the systemic injustices in my industry. So it's not a piece of advertising, it's a point of view that I was able to make palatable to groups of people that just were in denial that advertising was anything but a meritocracy, and that different points of views were critical to not only great creative points of view, but also to connecting with consumers, which don't all look like this one monolith. And so that, I think right now I'm super proud of. I'm writing a book called The Future Belongs to Belonging. And I'm talking about the relationship between inclusivity and creativity. And I mean, in a way, when you started this call off by talking about how a lot of communities don't even know about creative fields as, available to them, I'll also submit that even if they do know, if you are not part of the status quo, creativity is an act of where you have to feel a sense of psychological safety. in order to be vulnerable and really explore your own thinking and put ideas out there and let them be shot down or handled by someone else. And my point of view is that until people can really feel that they are treasured inside companies for their differences instead of just tolerated, that we will never, ever, ever have the unbelievable bounty of world changing ideas that is on the other side of radical inclusion. And that's my passion. And so, right now, I think the thing I'm most proud about from a writer standpoint is that I'm writing a book proposal about something that I think hasn't really been told. I mean, every time I hear the phrase bring your whole self to work, I kind of grimace because it's such a pithy, one dimensional way to look at something that I see as far more almost psychologically deep around how we're wired as people, and what enables us to either bring forth the greatness of our creativity or to kind of edit it and keep it small, or not go into those fields at all because you just don't feel that your weirdness will be embraced. And your weirdness, what I always tell everyone, is that the thing that makes you really idiosyncratic and strange and is the wonder of you. And that's, you want to find a company that loves that about you and says bring it all, and we're just not there yet. And I'm excited about what the world can look like when we do get there. I'm excited for all of us because we'll all benefit.
I think that's a remarkable example. But talk to me a little bit about, you unearth. So I think something that maybe was obvious to those of us who are on the other side of those systemic
Yeah.
injustices, but didn't have the language, the lexicon, or frankly, the bravery
Mm,
to stand in a space of just being, I'm so excited just to have the work. Now I'm
yeah.
going to throw this gender thing on top of it. In a world where you're like, I just want to fit in. And at a time where I would imagine there was a tremendous amount of kind of awakening and receptivity. Talk to me a little bit about that journey of the early days of, you know, coming to the realization, one, we are only 3% of leadership.
Yeah.
And two, what did those first conversations look like?
Yeah. A lot of this is hazy for me. I mean, if I'd known this was the journey I was setting off on, I would have kept a journal back to my childhood days of like the details of this. Um, but if there is kind of a lightning rod moment, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, it was when I was working at a big agency in San Francisco, and we were pitching a car account, and they only had one woman on the pitch team and 16 men. And I just remember thinking, that's screwed up. Like, I know who buys cars, and it's not only men. And um, so that was just one of those things where I was like, am I the only one seeing this? I didn't speak up about it. So I don't think I felt this, again, that word psychological safety, to be, speaking out against injustices. I was young then. It was before I had my kids, newly married. Grateful for the work, exactly what you said. And I'm a white woman. Like, I've talked to Latinas in my field, and they feel like, oh, I'm just so grateful to have a spot here, a seat at the table. And I totally get that. Oh, why would you then want to be the greasy wheel or the squeaky wheel? So there was that. And then I, I don't remember how, when I finally decided about 3%, that I wanted to host an event. I do remember feeling like there needed to be more widespread awareness of the fact that I was part of only 3% of creative directors that were women. But the thing that I think I intuited somehow, and that has ended up being the ultimate secret weapon for everything 3% has done, is communication through demonstration, just showing the world the way it should look and having people inhabit it and be like, this is amazing, including men, by the way, where they come to an event where everyone feels welcome and there's such a spirit of optimism and co-creation for the future that people are just, they're just excited again about their field, and they're more open and receptive, and they just generate at a higher level. And so I feel like that is the beauty of I just could imagine something. I could see the invisible and I made it visible for other people. And then they were like, why would I go back to something that feels so small in retrospect? And so, I mean, the thought today of a pitch team of 17 people having only one woman on it for a car brand, I mean, how embarrassing. But that was just, a little over 20 years ago. I mean, not that long ago. And so a lot has changed in that time. Not enough, but we're getting there.
Yes, no, I certainly, you say 20 years ago, I was on those pitch teams, 10.
Hmm.
I was that one, the only woman on the car team.
Yeah.
And I remember what it was like. And a part of it sometimes, particularly, in those moments, it was never about my gender. And if it had ever become one, I wasn't aware of it because I was so glad just to be there.
Yeah.
Right. We as creators, I think you've stumbled into, I think, one of the psychological truths of a safe space comes with accepting. And when you're a Latina, you're a woman of color, right? You come from any marginalized community. You're right that having a seat at that table, you feel like that statement of enough. I have shaken the boat up enough. Yes. And I think that one of the things that 3% has done for our communities of color certainly has, when I was at 3% this past time last year in 2019, the number of Latinas that came up to me after my talk and said, for say, thank you for, sharing that. But the second part was, I didn't know I had the right to want more.
Mm, exactly right. Exactly right. And I hear the same thing from older creatives that say they had kind of put themselves out to pasture and thought, well, I'll just, stay at this creative director job. And then they come to 3% and they're like, oh shit, like I'm gonna put my foot on the gas and I'm gonna gun for like an ECD job. It had never occurred to them that their experience was an asset and that they should, monetize it and capitalize upon those gifts. And so I think you're so right. Like the power of suggestion is so potent. And I think before organizations like 3% or Designed by Us came along, nobody was suggesting it. And so, or it was happening in these kind of really small silos. But then, I talk about the year 3% launched in 2012, and I had announced it in 2010, and 2012 was the first event. And Lean In hadn't even come out yet. It came in that first year after our event. And when I look back at the way things were in that, and that's only 8 years ago, the Clios had an all male jury that year. There were so many things that were just not questioned because they were just the way things were. And then sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just show another way of being without asking for permission,
Yeah.
without caring if you piss off some people. Just be like, hey, here's another way of looking at the world. And what's amazing to me is that I feel like all these organizations that are starting like now to address, women, they seem so unbelievably late to the party to me. I'm like, okay, now you're waking up to this. Like, this was not a secret, but I guess a lot of people just don't. Their brains are not trained to look for optimizations of things. And that's another thing. I back to my kids, like I instill in them that everything in the world is the way it is because some random person decided it. Like there's almost nothing that is fixed, I always say, other than gravity or DNA or, and so it's such a great way to go through the world to look at everything and not in a dissatisfied way. Like you can never just enjoy a vacation or a meal or whatever, but to think, I would have done that differently, just like I rewrote the headlines in my copywriting class. Like to be like, oh, I have it, I bring something, my unique point of view on the world is mine, and it's valuable, and to share it and to seek out others that also look at the world that way and to think about what's possible. And it's a great way to live. And we're living through the reason I wanted to write this book now is there are so many things in the world that are broken right now and are in need of dramatic reinvention and on a fast track, and creative people are the ones that are going to get it done. And the more of us that can link elbows and form coalitions and help one another and open doors, the faster it gets done and the more inclusive the solutions will be so that we all prosper. So it's a scary time to be alive right now, but I also feel like what an honor to be alive and to also, quite frankly, to be 54 years old at this moment, not maybe 20. And I don't want to discourage the 20-year-olds that might be listening or they're out there. You have a role here too. I like kind of being the grown up in this situation, that I've seen a lot, and I don't feel defensive or I have nothing left to prove, I
Yeah.
and so that's a really wonderful place to be as a woman, to be like, I've already proven myself. And not that I can't be wrong, and I always try to keep working on myself, but that I really am going to be loud about things that I think are unjust or even just illogical. And it's a nice time in life to feel this itchy to contribute, and to feel there's a direness to what's happening. So, yeah.
We're talking, it's April 15th.
Mhm.
In the world we lived in before, you and I would have been fretting about getting our taxes to the tax person. I certainly would have been, being a
Yeah.
creator. Look, I'm really great at creating. I have deficiencies in my operational excellence. And so, you try to imagine a world what would have been, but it's really interesting where we sit now in this space, right? COVID. The the implications of, I think, what COVID is doing is almost, it's, I don't want to say that it's a leveling event, meaning we're all on the same level playing field. I think you and I know that's a load of horseshit. But I think it actually might be a leveling event to businesses um, that didn't keep up or were taking this on as a gimmick,
Mm,
because I think that we'll make different decisions over it. I've had some really profound reflections in that there is no going back.
yeah.
We will never return to the life we know it without changing. We felt this after 9/11. Um, I think that as we look at now as this crisis is an opportunity, and um, you know, for listeners out there who have come of age, because you've talked about it in this space of reinvention.
Yeah.
And frankly, every creator that I have ever met, that I've either worked for, have worked with, that has worked for me, is an inventor deep down.
Yeah.
Whether we're in the business of reinventing a brand in the way that it communicates, or an actual product, right? Or um, reinventing the way that people look at the world. Um, that is an incredibly powerful gift. And I think what the crisis actually is calling for is invention, because what we realize now is there were a tremendous amount of unmet needs,
Yes.
things like our health, the systems in which are set up to support that health.
Yes.
We're down to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As much as I joke about, squunchies and sweatpants, like if we take a step back, you can't remove yourself from the reality that there are nurses and healthcare professionals that are in dire need of invention, right? Or that you look at cities and governments that are in dire need of, it's not reinvention, it's actually fully on down, like we didn't realize we hadn't taken care of that. I mean, because that's what it comes down to, is blindness to the things that we didn't take care of,
Yeah.
and a leveling of all things, including economic levers, to go, ooh, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in this space, this space, this space, and this space, and without being disgustingly opportunistic, how do you use that superpower and gift of invention to start applying it?
Mm,
And so, the really question comes into, it's like, in this time where I certainly hearing it, you're hearing it, which is fear from our community of creators, that the industries that used to employ them well. I mean, we make some good money here, right? Um, to a great degree. I think that sometimes we come out of this tremendous privilege. How do you transform that privilege into, you know, repivoting on, wait a minute, I'm going to need to reskill. I may need to readjust, but make it out of like transforming where we are today, which is fear. Because the worst thing that we can do as humans is work from a place of fear,
Yeah.
right? And transform it into a place of hope.
I want to tell a little story that I I've been writing about in the book I'm writing. Um, Quite a number of years ago, I was on an airplane and I was reading the book The 10 Faces of Innovation by the IDEO founders. And I had this aha moment. I remember I put the book down and had to like catch my breath because it was such a kind of gut punch. And it seems so obvious now, but it wasn't obvious to me. Essentially, these 10 faces of innovation were 10 different kind of dispositions or personality types that innovate. And I slowly realized when I was reading this book, oh, I get it. I'm a creative person. I picked up a pen and I became a copywriter. But that is not the limits of my creative contribution. And this was a revelation to me because you get so much in your job title and what you do and what you make and who you report to and who your clients are. And then a short while later, I was standing in my kitchen with my husband, our architect, and our builder, and we were redoing our kitchen. And there was this really thorny problem where we couldn't figure out how to incorporate a desk, which I wanted into the kitchen layout, without starving that corner of light. And there was just all these, and this was a spatial challenge. This I would put in the math side of the brain. And I was standing there and I had this aha and I said, what if we made that front hall closet two-sided and the back side of it closed the desk off and it freed up this room and we could put a window on this part of the wall. And my builder looked at me and he said, you just saved yourself $30,000. Like, and I remember in that moment thinking, I have been limiting my creativity's applications by virtue of how I see myself. And so when you talk about all these people in our creative community that are feeling unsafe right now, I want to honor that. Yes, jobs are going to change. Yes, you might lose your job. Yes. But I want to also say that if you are a creative person and can see the world with a what if lens, there's so many other contributions that you're needed to make in this moment. And so I would say the number one thing to do is to stop limiting your identity as one kind of a creator and think of yourself as a problem solver and look for ways, because God knows there's a lot of problems right now in the world, and get really open to what you could be doing right now. And yeah, it might require a little reskilling, but you can't manufacture that kind of thinking. You can maybe accelerate it a little, but some people are just really, really good at it. And if you already are a creative, you probably have some natural skill that you've gotten this far on, and now is an opportunity to just widen the lens of what you think you're capable of. So I think it's an exciting time for creatives and scary.
Yeah, it comes in two forms, right? I don't know about you, but it comes in waves of fear for sometimes just as I explained it recently today to a group of folks that work on my own team, and said, listen, this is about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we're back. Like we went one day, we were up at the top of enlightenment, and we've dropped down within a day of, in a 24-hour period for some of us, right,
Yeah.
that are down to, do I have water? Right? Do I have, what is the safety, the basics of human survival? And I think that's the jarring part of where we sit, and then you question yourself. It's often, I find, with creatives, they question their ability of their role, and they're actually seeking permission sometimes, right?
Mm,
How do we give permission to our community to say, at some point, we're all going to ask ourselves, what did you do in this time?
mm,
We will
yeah.
reflect back on that. And
Yeah.
so how might we, because it's so often and I shared this with somebody else talking about permission, going to an ECD, and I promise this is going to get into a question, but I use this example of Look, I was an ECD on Madison Avenue working for Nick Moore, and I use his name very specifically because he was a remarkable leader
Hmm.
and a really tough job. It's the chief creative. And he was actually one of the more forward progressive leaders because there were a number of women ECDs. I was among them, and it was because he hired them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember going in for my career conversation. And look, I'm one of the Latinx kids that you always feel like, I'm just so happy that you're here. Please like me.
Yeah,
Boss,
yeah.
you're in control of my paycheck. It's a very powerful place to be, and people forget that. But he asked a really important question I wasn't ready to answer, which was, where did I see myself? What was my dream? And it took me a moment, and I almost cavalierly yet um, laughing because it was a joke to even me,
Mm.
said, I'm going to sit in your seat. That was my reply. And
Wow.
he looks back at me and he says, of course you will.
I love it. Yeah.
I have no doubt that you're going to be in this seat.
Mm.
And what I share with you is that I didn't have the permission. Like, he wasn't granting the permission, and nor was I sick. But in that moment, all of a sudden, I saw myself like that somebody in that seat saw and took me seriously to be in that seat, and be unafraid to one, admit it and approach it from a place in is security, right?
Yeah.
A place of security, that he wasn't in fear of his job.
Yes. Yes.
Somebody telling him, I want to get rid of you, dude. Like, it wasn't the intent of the conversation, but it was almost like, I want to be a chief creative officer when I grow up.
Mm.
And in that moment, in those seconds, it was that giving of permission. And it is those little moments that I think often, how do we do that in mass? I feel like you have captured that zeitgeist at 3%.
Yeah, and it's so important that you examine the people you spend your time with, your tribe, because they say that the five people you spend the most time with kind of dictate a lot of things about your life, including your health. And so, if there are women listening to this, women of color, gay women, anyone who has felt like they're not, fully invited or embraced wherever they're working, it's super important you look at who you're surrounding yourself with, because you want, like in that moment of where you said that and he said, well, of course, you want friends that are kind of, telling you that as well. And I say that to so many members of our community. I'm always amazed that they'll send me an email and they'll say, hey, Kat, I'm thinking about entering this competition, but I'm not sure. Could you look at my portfolio? And I don't even need to look at their portfolio. They're really just looking for me to say, you have what it takes. And we all have what it takes. And so, what's sad is that I think a lot of people are overconfident that they have what it takes if they're the status quo. But it's amazing how just telling women, like, well, why not you? And I see you doing that. And they see me doing this. I mean, I started 3% when I was 46 years old. I mean, that's dinosaur in, the advertising world. But I realize how much my limiting beliefs, it's an inside job. Like the calls are coming from inside the house. And so it's so important that you have other people coaching you and mentoring you and cheerleading you. And it's also important you be that for other people. And so I think the biggest delight of my life is to have that role for a huge community of creatives and to just be telling them, I mean, I end almost every call I have with someone that needs advice or mentorship with, I'm rooting for you. I just say that. And it's, God, what a potent thing to just know someone thinks you have what it takes. And so, um, yeah, I really, I believe in this community. It's like so big, so badly. I believe in everyone that felt weird, everyone that's an immigrant, anyone who's disabled, anyone who had a lisp growing up, like any way you felt weird or outside or not enough, or like that's the very thing I think is that makes you amazing. And like, I just love seeing people at our event that aren't the usual suspects. And yeah, it's a changing world. And you know what? If there's anyone listening to this that is the status quo and is afraid that they're going to be replaced, that's not what this is about. This is not a zero sum game. Like, we all win when all the brains and all of the creative light is fully utilized. And your life will benefit, your creative partnerships will benefit if you're not ideating with someone that looks just like you. Your world, the climate, everything that you care about is going to be bettered when more people are invited to the co-creation of our own future. And so it's an exciting time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was really beautiful. Thank you. There were so many, nuggets in there that I want to part, but I would love to really talk a little bit about, you talked about, what it was like at 46 to be starting it, yet something else new, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which often is a point of reinvention, or maybe even feeling like you're starting over. What were the hurdles that you faced?
Um, I think it was hard. I mean, I didn't set out to start a social movement, and I didn't set out to make this my full-time job. I convened a one-time event in San Francisco in my backyard because I wanted to talk about it. So I think the biggest hurdle was in thinking is in actually keeping up with the appetite that showed up. And I remember, and this is a nice little nod to my husband. I remember being out for drinks with him one Friday night, pretty early on in the 3% movement. And I was just telling him how we were getting all this interest in bringing the event overseas, and, Brazil and all these other countries that were just desperate to have this conversation. And he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I guess I could allow other people to start their own 3% movements." And he leaned forward and he said, "Catherine, why would you build something so valuable and walk away from it right when the world is saying they want it?" And he's like, "Get on an airplane and go change the world." And I realize how much, again, he's part of my tribe of five. He wasn't threatened by having a wife that was gonna, make a name for herself and not be home to do some household stuff with two kids at home. So I think the hardest part in those early years was managing a new life for myself. I mean, I didn't travel for work before this. I wasn't really a household name creative. Another huge challenge for me was I'm quite introverted, like all of a sudden being on stage all the time and it took, it still takes a lot out of me. That was a challenge. Just managing my own energy around this was hard. The constancy of it, like I haven't felt like I can get off the treadmill because there's just so much urgency to this mission. Um, but all of these things that I'm telling you have been hard, they have been so worth it. Like they're hard because this was something that landed big and fat and fast, and I had to kind of quickly adapt and like keep up and challenge myself to be a leader and to be on stage and to in ways that I didn't think I was. And again, I think what makes me weird and unusual and different um, is why the community loves me, because I am just me. And I didn't have some like superpower that made me like the obvious choice. I just was dedicated and I didn't let up, and I cared deeply, and I still do. And it's amazing how much sincerity matters. I mean, sincerity of who you are, what you care about, who you're going to show up for. Um, that'll take you really far in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we talk about overcoming those hurdles and overcoming, whether it's, that a real transformation, frankly, when you talk about it, it feels like a true reinvention of something that, one day I was comfortable this, and I took myself out of into a very uncomfortable space,
Mm,
right? I think one of my bosses would be Jenny Rometty, and she has this great quote that talks about, the time that she realized when she stopped growing was when she started feeling comfortable.
mm,
That there was something like comfort and growth cannot coexist.
mm,
And I think it's something as I've heard you talk about this in the journey, that a part of it was, finding um, a an approach to like, of coming of age for you, frankly, right?
Yeah,
It feels a little bit of that, but also I would tell you that you do have the superpower, and a part of that superpower has been inspiring others,
mm,
because that sincerity is so lacking in the world. Like, we came out of Madison Avenue. Sincerity, come on. Not a business known for its sincerity, known for its wild creativity, but a sincere truth. We talk about customer truth, and we talk about digging to it, but inevitably, you get to a place of, let's just deceive the client so they buy the next ad. It's like, well, that's not right. Um, in that journey, you run across the good and the bad of people. And I really
yeah,
love to give people the opportunity to acknowledge in that journey, there were people who sponsored you into the next space in your journey.
yeah.
Surely you had mentors, but who are the people who put that, either sponsored you into the next space, invested in you in capital, or put their badge on the table and said, she's worth it?
Yeah. I mean, Nancy Hill from the 4As for sure. Cindy Gallup has always been a huge cheerleader of mine, even before we met. I mean, agreed to speak at the first 3% conference. I actually currently have a mentor that's a man. He's on our advisory board, Rob Schwartz, who's the CEO of TBWA. And when I asked him if it was just this past year that we started a formal mentorship, um, and he almost felt like I didn't need it. And I said, Rob, for my age, I've been on my own for so long as a freelancer or a small business runner. I said, I haven't had a performance review in over 20 years. Like, I don't get steady feedback in a professional level, and I want it. And those calls with Rob are so helpful to me. A lot of times it's just validating my instinct, and he'll say, you're right, or have you thought about this? But he has amazing instincts about where I should be putting my attention, and a lot of it is just reassuring me to keep doing what I'm doing naturally, and that's the right place to be. So I would say Rob. um, I've been very inspired by Tiffany Warren and what she's done with ad color. I didn't know her when I started 3%. I hadn't heard of ad color, and I've been to maybe 4 ad color conferences over the years. And just the community she's birthed, and her gentleness as a leader I find really refreshing. Back to the sincerity thing. Um, yeah, those are some of the people that stand out to me. I mean, there have been so many people that have been good to 3% good to me. And I think that's another thing that challenges me is my mom raised me to be a thank you note writer and a very polite girl. And if you're going to run a really busy enterprise of any kind, you have to let go. You're going to disappoint some people. You're going to forget to get back to some people. You're going to totally not intentionally, but your life is going to move at a clip where you can't always do all the niceties that you'd like to. And I think that I'm always thinking, like, who haven't I thanked, or who doesn't know I appreciate them? And I'm sure there are plenty of people that fit in there. And I try anytime I feel something or admire someone, I try to quickly send them an email or a text or to voice it, because I know how quickly we forget or we think that we did it, even though we just thought it. So I'm amazed at how much, especially younger women, will tell me that I said something in an interview like this, or on stage at 3%, or in meeting them in a crowd. They're like, I'll never forget. I wrote it down and I think about it every day. And I'm like, wow, like, I really don't think I always understand how much power we have as leaders. And this year, I think I've taken that more seriously than ever before in my life. I've realized that it's very important to remember that people are watching us, and that in moments of uncertainty, like with COVID, everybody rushed to put out like a press release or an email, and I watched. My instinct was to sit very, very still and to observe everything around me, governments, individuals, companies, like what's happening here. Um, and very slowly, I kind of developed what my point of view was for our community, and then I put it out in a newsletter format. And a lot of people reached out after that and said, I really loved what you wrote. I don't think it was necessarily like brilliant. It was just, again, sincere. Like I was looking at everything through the lens of how can I be of comfort here? Where is 3% in a unique position right now to offer, some kind of help and resources? And yeah, so much of leadership is just realizing you don't know everything, but what you do know is often enough and needed. I can't hear you.
There we go.
There we go.
I said,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So, you talk about this remarkable journey, one that is one of exploration and discovery, and the people who have sponsored your success along the way. If there was one thing people did not know about you,
Mhm.
what do you think that would be?
Um, Such a beautiful question. Um, I think deep down they wouldn't know how shy I still am. I think that's really it. I mean, so many people think of me as this face of something, and they've seen me on stages, and but deep down I'm still a pretty shy kid. And by the way, that's also um people that are really creative are that way because they notice it's a very tiring way to go about the world, is because you're far more observant of details and human behavior, and so everything is a little more tiring for you. And so I think people would not know how exhausted I am and how shy I really am, yet I still show up with the big energy and the leader posture in order to help others believe they can do that, because they can. And I don't say that to complain. I'm able to do it. I just think probably I make it look more effortless than it feels to me as an introvert.
I think that's great, and it's very revealing. And then sometimes you have to commit. So you get about the world, even in a COVID-related world, I see you making connections, getting people there. What inspires you these days? Where are you taking inspiration from?
Yeah, I'm so inspired by youth. I mean, I you were at the November event. Did you see that session on the main stage of the high school boys from New York City that started the feminist club at their all boys high school? Those young men were exceptional. And just seeing, I remember when I spoke to one of them on the phone when I first reached out to invite them to Chicago. Um, I remember saying to him, I think he was 15 when he launched that club. And I said, what made you think to do this, especially at an all boys high school? And he said, it occurred to me that I should care about something that doesn't impact me personally. And I was like, that is that is everything. Like that is what so few of us do well. Compassion bias. We only care about things that touch us or those we love. And what's beautiful about what he said is that ultimately when we go down that path of giving to something that we don't think, everything comes back to us in the end because we're all connected. And so he's sitting on that stage as a feminist in front of all the men that came to our conference, and they're looking at this 17-year-old young man who is painting a picture of the future and what leadership looks like. And I'll bet there were a lot of 30, 40, 50-year-old men in that audience that were like, oh crap, like I need to up my game. They were inspired by him. So I'm very inspired by the young generation of leaders. I'm very inspired by um, the speed at which, I mean, I just talked about how my instinct was to sit and be very quiet and be methodical. But like, look at the first responders that don't have, like, that leap into action, that are trained to be decisive in moments where life and death. Like, I'm so inspired just by the helpers and the medical workers around us right now. Um, I'm inspired by the female leaders in other countries that are showing that their countries are faring better by the actions of these female leaders. Um, yeah, and just I feel like the creativity on display right now, like when things are crazy making in the world, it brings out even outrage. Like if you think about all the posters at the Women's March, or the creativity of people speaking their anger and their hopes and their frustrations is, it just, it's really inspired. The humor, I mean, every single day I read something on Twitter that just makes me guffaw. I'm just amazed at some of the memes people create. And yeah, it's, there is no lack of inspiration in my life. I feel like every day going about my daily life, even if it's in my house, just searching my social feeds, there's a lot to get me inspired. Wait, you're mute again.
Whoops, sorry about that. I said, yeah, I've got a tumultuous relationship with my social feeds these days. I hear you. So we talked about what inspires you. Who inspires you in that space? Are there people that just like stick out in a crowd and you go, oh, wow, that I hadn't thought about something that way?
Hmm. You know what's funny is that today I was thinking about the fact that the most healing moment I've had in this whole crisis, and this almost feels like the opposite answer to probably what you expected. I was so inspired by the Queen of England in her green dress, giving her speech when she said, "Better days are ahead." I think that's exactly what she said. Do not despair, better days are ahead. That there was something again about this woman and I watched the Crown, and she has seen so much in her life, and the fact that she is speaking from a position of authority and life experience, and that those simple words of comfort, better days will return. um, I don't know why, it was like a grandmother figure that I found deeply healing. So that's another example of the grown-ups are needed sometimes, like people that have seen a lot and have lived through wars, and that inspired me. Who else am I inspired by what I'm seeing? Um, in the creative community, I love keeping up with Tina Roth Eisenberg from Creative Mornings. Are you familiar with Tina? She's putting out this newsletter every week with just things she's seeing that make her happy or intrigued. And I like her spirit. I think she's someone who, she's sharing some of the challenges her companies are going through in this downturn, but she's still finding a lot of juiciness, and her Creative Mornings are now global, and she's convening. She's a very generous person. Like, she's someone I admire. Um, yeah, I guess people who, even in times of turmoil where they don't have all the answers, are somehow able to be a healing presence. I really admire that.
Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. I invite you to join us on the next episode as we discover the voices and magic makers changing the very shape of our future by design.